Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Texas Women's Foundation podcast, Strong Women, Better Texas, where we'll discuss topics that impact the lives of women, girls, and families across our state, and how we can individually and collectively create solutions to build stronger women and create a better Texas. I'm Karen Hughes White, President and CEO of Texas Women's Foundation. Our mission is to drive meaningful social and economic change for women, girls, and families statewide by leveraging our resources to invest in research, advocacy, grant making, and leadership training to support our vision of an equitable society where women and girls can fully participate. We're kicking off this podcast with our first series, The State of Women in Texas. In this series, we'll be sounding the alarm on some of the most concerning issues and statistics about the realities facing women, girls, and families in Texas. These findings explain why Texas ranks 47th out of 50 states for women's overall economic success and well-being. How is this possible in a state with one of the largest and most robust economies in the nation? Well, stay tuned. You're about to find out. Joining me today is Coda Reyo-Garza, who is the Director of Research and Data at Every Texan. Coda is a fronteriza, born and raised in Laredo. She's worked in the nonprofit and government sectors in various roles throughout her career. She's also a current PhD candidate, which I have no idea how she fits that into her life, in applied demography at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Her areas of expertise include racial, ethnic, gender, and poverty disparities, and especially along Texas's border areas. Coda is also the co-author of a recently published book through Polity Press. It's titled Latinas in the U.S. Diversity and Change. So as the Director of Research and Data at Every Texan, Coda works with clients like Texas Women's Foundation to produce research reports that aggregate quality data to improve and strengthen communities in Texas. Coda was the lead researcher for this year's Economic Issues for Women in Texas report, which Texas Women's Foundation partners with Every Texan to produce every 2 years. This year's report reveals data around the persistent issues that challenge women and their families' ability to live economically secure lives and thrive here in Texas. In this 5th edition of our report, we examine the shifting landscape for women in Texas, noting a significant increase in women entering the workforce and contributing valuably to our state's economic output. Yet, the policies and the practices that are in place continue to fall short in supporting women's full participation in the workforce. So in this episode, we're going to take a deeper dive into the data and talk about the approach and the methodology and the findings with our dear friend and super smart data scientist, Coda. She's been a tremendous partner in this work. Welcome, Coda. We are so excited you've joined us today.
Thank you, Karen, for having me here today. I'm so excited and so proud to be here joining you all. You know that Every Texan truly values our partnership and the partnership we have with the Texas Women's Foundation over the years. At Every Texan, as you know, we envision a state, a Texas, where people of all backgrounds can fulfill their potential and contribute to our community. And our organization believes that if we strengthen public policy, that if we use research and data, we can expand opportunity and equity for everyone. So that's why the mission of the Texas Women's Foundation to invest in the power of women and girls is across the state is just so important to us. Our missions together, I think, share the same soul. And so we deeply appreciate working with you all on this report and just having your partnership.
Well, and you know we feel the same on our side, right? And the work and the data is so rich and unique this year insofar as we took a slightly different lens. It's our fifth report in the last 10 years. This year, we looked at the data through the lens of the Texas workforce. So let's dive into it, right? Let's talk about how every Texan approaches this work, particularly during the initial stages of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the start of it really is thinking, jointly, sort of co-creating the outcome or the end goal. What do we want to share with folks this time around? What are the most important key takeaways that we want folks to leave with after they've looked at the report? And how does what we're sharing in the report impact you as an individual and individuals in the community? One of my favorite sort of processes for creating is human-centered design. And so the second phase of human-centered design is ideation. So coming up with, in our ideal world, we want a report that can do X, Y, and Z. In this case, like I said, after we've jointly decided what we want this report to say, what we want to show and share, we move into the little bit of the more tricky stuff, which is, well, what data is actually available to us that we can use to tell that story and to get to that end goal. So,
well, this was my first time through this process, right, as the new-ish CEO for Texas Women's Foundation. So much fun to work with you through this process. And what I found fascinating is the way the story almost revealed itself as we began looking at the data. There were some parts of the process where I think the data shared something new or maybe even surprised us in ways we weren't expecting. So that co-creation process and that level of collaboration that we were able to share was really pretty terrific. And it certainly made for better and more compelling storytelling, right, as we've now issued the report. But for our listeners, could you share what the primary sources were that were used to gather the research?
Yes, this is my favorite part. This is my favorite question that I get asked when we have these kind of conversations about data sources. I think maybe in another world, if I hadn't had formal training to be a demographer, maybe I would want to be a methodologist because I love these parts of research. So for this report, we primarily used U.S. Census data, but I'm going to give you sort of a tour of the survey instruments that we relied on. Some of them do come from the U.S. Census, most of them do, but the background I think might be useful for folks. It can be pretty eye-opening. So we know that the U.S. Census Bureau produces numerous surveys. The decennial census, for example, it's the most widely known because it's the one you've probably seen marketing for, throughout your life. The decennial census is super important because it's a count survey. So what this means is that the Census Bureau is trying to collect data on every single person living in the U.S. I still remember when I was a little girl, the census worker was coming to our door, knocking on the door, asking my mom for the information. So that's count data. And that happens every 10 years. So every 10 years, this massive effort, it produces a super rich data set that provides things like official population count, as well as demographic, housing, and household data. And this data set is super critical because we use it to determine things like congressional representation. It influences federal funding allocation, and it's truly a benchmark for all kinds of research and policy decisions. But while the decennial census is a great tool for understanding population counts, it doesn't capture some of the more detailed characteristics of the population. And this is where that change over time. And this is where the American Community Survey, or what we refer to as the ACS, comes in. So ACS estimates tell us that the differences in wages between men and women are XYZ. So these estimates that ACS gives us cover a wide range of topics, things like income, employment, education, housing, even commuting patterns. And the latest changes to the ACS, now we're going to be able to look at things like solar panels. They're taking information on solar panels and on electric vehicles. So it's collected annually, so it gives us it allows us to track changes and trends in a way that the once in a decade census just can't. Now, another source, it's the same source, but another sort of angle from which we use the ACS for this report was looking at microdata from the American Community Survey. So microdata refers to individual level responses to the survey. They are obviously de-identified, but having microdata, it gives folks and researchers the ability to create really customized analyses beyond what is pre-tabulated on the census website using their kind of very user-friendly general aggregate tables. When we use the microdata, we can dig even deeper into specific questions. So if we want to break out the wage gap by different age categories and race and ethnic groups, we're able to do that using microdata, and then to get down to a geography like Dallas County or Bexar County. We also pulled data from other sources like the Federal Reserve Bank, and we had a couple of there was some household HUD data in there as well. One quick reminder is the surveys are released there's a 1-year lag. So we get 2025 data in 2026. And so sometimes folks will see on the source, it'll say, oh, that's 2023. Well, at that time, that was probably the most recently available data.
So a variety of sources, right? And thanks for the call out on using the most recent data that's available, which often is that 1 year or sometimes even 2 years, right, in arrears of our reporting. But as you gather the data and begin the analysis, with the end in mind, right, looking to answer questions we've identified on the first part of the process, right, that initial phase, and then you start reviewing the results. Let's just dig in. What insights did you uncover on behalf of Texas Women's Foundation?
Yeah, so that the Every Texan research and data team just gets a little excited, and there was so much that we just kind of pulled at the onset. But a lot of things stand out. As we dug through the data, we found that many of the outcomes for women that we hear in narratives consistently about women and equity in Texas, those things persist, like the wage gap. But we also then learned from the data, but also the research, that women aren't being given enough credit for their contribution to the state's economic well-being. So, for example, the fact that in 2021 alone, women-owned employer firms employed about 1 million people, and they paid out over $30 billion in wages, and that's pretty big. And why it is important, as you've been saying, to sound the alarm on things like this is because the flip side of that, so we know how the tremendous contribution of women, but the flip side of that is that in 2022, over half, something like 52% of male business owners who applied for funding received all of the funding they requested, but that percentage is only 36 for women who applied. There were so many insights, the economic impact of the wage gap. What does it mean if we close it? The consistently shocking data about women's health insurance rates, how it continues to be the worst in the nation. And then even, one of the pieces that is shocking for a lot of people, and even when we look at it and we kind of expect it, it's still shocking, is the differences in wage gap across the different levels of educational attainment, and in particularly that really high kind of graduate or professional degree category, where we see it's the biggest wage gap across the different categories. And across the state, there was also variation county by county that was also very interesting.
And I agree, right? You and I had the privilege of presenting this data together when we first released the report back in November. And as we were doing so, I mean, at times there were audible gasps in the room, right? Things that shocked people in the room from different aspects of the research, right? And people with differing perspectives. I do think your point about how the wage gap, ever persistent, right, widens as women achieve, persist, and attain higher level degrees, that the wage gap actually widens. I think that was one of the aha moments that caught a lot of people by surprise. But let's talk about, right, we've got the data, we've got the report. How do we turn it into a compelling story that really starts to highlight the impact that the challenges facing women have not only on women, right, but on Texas families and the overall Texas economy?
Yeah, well, I think the Texas Women's Foundation is an exemplar for this type of work. You know, at the last presentation we did together, you lead with real stories about real people. And, you shared that video and it was incredibly powerful. It really sort of, it's a good way to ground folks in the humanity that rests behind every data point and every estimate. I love data because it's non-sentient. It sounds weird, but what I mean is that it's objective and it doesn't exist based on human subjectivity. It's going to tell you the reality and what the truth is. Our job is to interact with the data, understand what the patterns within it are trying to tell us, and then visualize it or summarize it, find some kind of a medium. One of the most powerful projects that I've worked on is in my professional and academic career is one where we combined the qualitative data with quantitative data. And so it was in a visual format, and it was just a beautiful embed throughout the scenes of data and numbers. Because if you see, X percentage of women in Texas don't have, whatever it is, but then you see it right next to, or as you're looking at a photo of a family, it seems to me that it is an easier way to arrive at empathy and the element of humanness, and it potentially opens people up to be able to have that important dialogue. So I think, in terms of taking the data, accompanying it, reminding folks why it matters at the human level, I think is super impactful.
Well, I agree with you 100%, right? The ability to humanize the data, right, and to bring it to life for folks so that they can connect with this, right? Because the report, as we've now presented it a few times, it's data heavy, right? A bit of a data dump. So to be able to take those moments to connect it back to people's actual humanity is super important in driving impact as we're sharing the research. One of the things I love best about this report and the way you've cast the data sort of through this different lens is the conversation it allows us to have as the 89th legislative session is now underway. It allows us to talk about things differently, factually, right, with a lot of data behind us, raising issues that may be women's issues, but have such a deep impact on the continued success of the, $2.4 trillion economy in the state of Texas, right? For us to continue to enjoy that kind of success as a state, we have to be able to look at these critical factors that are impacting 46% of the state's workforce that are women, right? So that's what excites me personally, is the opportunity it's giving us to have very different conversations in Austin than maybe we've been able to have in the past. So, from your perspective, right, how can the knowledge and the data that's shared in the report help us improve the state of women in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is exactly right. I think it's part of the answer. There's so much power in knowledge and in the data within the report. It makes me think of a quote that I love, and it's in Spanish, and it says, "No estudio para saber más, sino para ignorar menos," which means I don't study or, seek knowledge and education to learn more, but to ignore less. It's by a famous Mexican writer and philosopher. And when you read through the report and you sort of really wrap your head around the findings and the data, it becomes impossible to ignore the feeling of needing to act. And I think one of the easiest ways individuals can use the data to help improve the state of women in Texas is simply by sharing the knowledge and the findings of the report with their peers. Sharing information is going to create greater awareness to the barriers, a lot of which we know are policy decisions. And, it was sort of policy by design that are holding Texas women back from greater contribution to the state's economy. So, I think how do we use the data to help improve the state of women in Texas is we share the information, we share the knowledge. I know the Texas Women's Foundation has a social media toolkit that might make it easier for those who primarily like to navigate the interwebs. But I think generally, dialogue is a powerful thing. And having conversations with people and finding opportunities to open up those dialogues about the true state of women in Texas is going to get us one step closer. We'll get there in small steps, and we won't get there tomorrow, but it'll take time because, again, it's policy by design. So we have to undo a lot of that. And so I know the Texas Women's Foundation now has a legislative agenda, and I think that serves as a really important guide for people, maybe people who aren't at the Capitol during the legislative session, but folks that want to understand, whenever you see a headline that says this bill now made it to the governor's desk, you can look at the Texas Women's Foundation legislative priorities and see if there's alignment there, or does it go against what we believe are the best policies for women in the state. And obviously those things are informed by data, by the research, by the findings. So it's all connected, and I think it can all be impactful.
And for us, right, this research undergirds everything we do at Texas Women's Foundation. So yes, it does inform our advocacy work. It also informs our grant-making work. It informs the educational initiatives and leadership training opportunities that we develop and offer, right? So it really is the foundation that we're built on, critically important to our existence and to the ways in which we look to fulfill our mission, and vision of creating an equitable society in which women and girls can fully participate. I will say that the report, right, goes a little deeper. Yes, we dumped some data on you, right? And we do tell a story. We thread the data together. But another piece of the work were the policy recommendations for each section in the report that allows people to engage with the information and to engage in activities that can make a difference. So to me, that's another point of pride in the way we worked through this, right? That, we took the data and the research and have turned it into real action for our readers. And that was a very collaborative process, Coda, on your side of the house, right? So tell us how every Texan sort of comes together as a team to make sense, right, of the data that are shared in these reports.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great policy team, and we have a great chief of legislative affairs who has a lot of experience at the at the Capitol and engaging in this work. And so, we bring together the data and the research and we summarize it. And he is able to review it and inform the policy pieces and be able to tell us, this was a policy priority 2 years ago when the Texas Women's Foundation report was released, but this bill has since passed and that's no longer relevant. Or, at the last session, they were talking about X, Y, Z. And so we're very lucky to have that expertise in the organization, and we do have policy analysts across the different policy priorities of the organization: health and food justice, education, worker power, and they're truly the boots on the ground. They're at the Capitol, and they they catch wind of all of the happenings and can give us a perspective that is very important, especially as advocates and as organizations that are trying to produce the most relevant and timely information for our community and our partners. And so, we're lucky that we have that synergy and the expertise on the team. And of course, we're always happy to support and help organizations that share in our mission and our values, like the Texas Women's Foundation.
Well, we feel very lucky that you have the expertise too, because it did result in making our report robust and rich, but also actionable, right? Which I think sometimes when this data comes at you, it's a lot, right? And it can be a little overwhelming. Like, how can we possibly do this? Where do we start, right? And to your point, this is where we start, right? To drive systemic social and economic change for women. A, we have to understand what the challenges are, right? And B, we've got to focus on what we can do now and then next, right, to move the needle. So my next question for you, I'm almost afraid to ask because I know how much you love data. What data do you feel is missing from the report? And then what would you, smart one, like to investigate further, right? Is there anything that came up in the report that has driven you to want to search more deeply for answers?
Yes. There's so much.
I knew that would be your answer.
I'm always a huge proponent of longitudinal data. So, for example, how did the median income of this group of women improve after X intervention or participation in X program? There's just so much power, I think, in being able to prove that certain solutions, policies, or programs work. But yeah, it's a great question.
Well, and you've given us so much to work with, right? So already from the research, Texas Women's Foundation has published an article about sounding the alarm around the state of women in Texas. We've published that far and wide. It's creating conversation and buzz in the places it needs to be creating that, right? We talked about, and you just referenced, the amount of collaboration it's going to take to change things, right? Public-private collaboration, the role of philanthropy, right? The role of organizations like Every Texan to even identify, right, and zone in on those issues. So, as we continue to share our research, there is some additional information forthcoming as we've jumped off of the initial research to say, hey, there's a couple more things here that we'd really like to take a look at. So forthcoming is a corporate white paper that we'll be sharing. It starts to quantify the overall impact of the wage gap here in Texas. And our initial numbers, which we won't share today, but we'll keep everyone on the edge of their seats, are staggering. They're shocking, right? And invite us all to much more action around that. Coda, it is always good to be with you. You are so smart and so good at what you do, but you're so passionate about the issues. And I think that's what makes this partnership so very special. So thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here with you today, and we are just so grateful again for the opportunity to work together. Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode with our guest, Coda Reyo-Garza from Every Texan. We invite you to learn more about the research that Coda conducted by going to our website, txwf.org/research. And while you're there, you're also going to find different ways that you can engage in the work, share key messages on social media, and support the Texas Women's Foundation mission. We are so grateful to Coda and Every Texan for their continued partnership and their unwavering commitment to the work that we're doing together to build more inclusive and equitable communities across our state. We are grateful for the support from the Dodie Frost Crockett Endowment, which is funding this podcast. Dodie has been a longtime friend and supporter of Texas Women's Foundation. Her contributions to our mission support the work that we're doing today to share these insights with a broader audience, to build a movement of champions for change. I'd also like to thank our partners at ISP Creative for helping us put this together. They're the behind-the-scenes magic. Now, make sure you tune in to hear more about the state of women in Texas in our upcoming episodes that will be released weekly. You can find them on our website, txwf.org, and on social media, at Texas Women's FDN, along with ways to support our mission. Thank you for joining us as we work together to build strong women, better Texas.